Number 1. Clara Harris. On the evening of July 24th, 2002, emergency responders were dispatched to the Nassau Bay Hilton parking lot following reports of a traffic incident. Hotel records showed the location was the same venue where the involved parties had married 10 years earlier on Valentine's Day, 1992. Clara Suarez was born in Bogota, Colombia, on February 3, 1958. She pursued dentistry in her home country before relocating to the United States in the late 1980s. After completing her residency at the University of Texas School of Dentistry in Houston, she established herself professionally and was named Miss Columbia Houston at a local pageant. She met David Harris, an orthodontist, while both worked at Castle Dental Center in 1991. The relationship progressed rapidly. They married on February 14, 1992, less than 1 year after meeting. Clara opened her own dental practice in 1993. David later established Space Center Orthodontics near Houston. Together they operated a successful chain of dental offices, earning substantial income. The couple had twin sons named Brian and Bradley in 1998. David also had a daughter named Lindsay from a previous marriage, who lived with them during summer months. To those who knew them, the family appeared financially secure and professionally accomplished. In the spring of 2002, David Harris began an extramarital relationship with Gail Bridges, who worked as a receptionist at his orthodontics office. Clara became aware of the situation on July 17, 2002, when David acknowledged the relationship. Clara confronted Bridges at the orthodontics office that same day and informed her that her employment was terminated, and David and Clara discussed repairing their marriage. David told associates that reconciliation was underway. He informed Clara that he planned to meet Bridges one final time to end the relationship formally, stating to her that he had led Bridges to believe his marriage was open and owed her clarity. On July 24, 2002, Clara hired Blue Moon Investigations to monitor David's activities. That evening, the investigator contacted Clara to report that David and Bridges were not at a restaurant, as David had indicated, but were together at the Nassau Bay Hilton. Clara's stepdaughter Lindsay was with her at the time. Clara drove to the hotel with Lindsay in the vehicle. Security cameras and witness accounts documented Clara locating David and Bridges in the hotel lobby. A physical confrontation occurred between Clara and Bridges, during which Clara removed Bridges' shirt. Hotel staff intervened and requested that Clara leave the premises. The first emergency call to authorities that evening came from a hotel operator reporting the lobby altercation. David and Bridges exited the hotel and walked toward the parking lot. Clara remained in the area. Video footage captured by the private investigator showed Clara's silver Mercedes-Benz sedan striking David Harris as he walked Bridges to her vehicle. The footage documented the vehicle running over David multiple times. Lindsay Harris was in the passenger seat throughout the incident. Emergency services received a second call, reporting the parking lot collision. Responders arrived to find David Harris with severe injuries. He was transported to a medical facility where he was pronounced deceased. The Harris County medical examiner later determined the cause of death was blunt force trauma, consistent with being struck by a motor vehicle. Investigators secured the private investigator's video recording. The footage provided a visual timeline of events in the parking lot. Lindsay Harris provided a statement to authorities. Additional witnesses who were present in the parking lot were interviewed. Clara Harris was taken into custody and charged with murder. The case proceeded to trial in early 2003. Prosecutors argued that Clara Harris acted with intent when she struck David Harris with her vehicle. The private investigator's video was introduced as evidence. Testimony from Lindsay Harris and other witnesses was presented. The prosecution contended that the repeated nature of the vehicle striking David demonstrated deliberate action. The defense acknowledged that Clara was responsible for David's death, but argued that she acted under sudden passion caused by discovering her husband with another woman. Defense attorneys emphasized Clara's emotional state following the confrontation in the hotel lobby. They presented testimony regarding Clara's previous character and reputation as a professional and mother. The jury was tasked with determining whether the incident constituted murder or a lesser charge influenced by extreme emotional disturbance. On February 14, 2003, the jury returned a verdict. Clara Harris was convicted of murder with a finding of sudden passion. The sudden passion finding meant the jury accepted that Clara acted under extreme emotional distress, which under Texas law reduced the sentencing range. The conviction date fell on what would have been the couple's 11th wedding anniversary. Judge Carol Davies sentenced Clara Harris to 20 years in prison, the maximum sentence permitted under the sudden passion finding, and imposed a $10,000 fine. Clara Harris was incarcerated at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas. She applied for parole in 2013 and was denied. A second parole request in 2016 was also denied. In November 2017, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles granted parole. She was released on May 11, 2018, after serving 15 years of her sentence. She completed the terms of her parole supervision in February 2023. The private investigator's footage, recorded in the same parking lot where Clara and David Harris had celebrated their wedding, remained the central piece of evidence throughout all legal proceedings. Number 2, Stephen Neil Milner. On January 27, 2023, Intel Corporation security personnel, reviewing overnight footage from the Ronler Acres campus parking structure in Hillsboro, Oregon, noticed that multiple cameras had been spray-painted during daylight hours. The tampering occurred in a section where employee vehicles were typically parked. Digital records showed the same area had been accessed by an unregistered vehicle on multiple occasions over the preceding weeks. Stephen Neil Milner was born in the mid-1960s and established himself as a licensed veterinarian in Oregon City. He opened and operated a veterinary clinic that served the local community for approximately 2 decades. Colleagues described him as competent in his professional duties. He employed a small staff including veterinary technicians and administrative personnel. One longtime employee was Tanya Fondrick, who had worked at the clinic for several years. Tanya was married to Kenneth Fondrick. Kenneth worked as a contractor at Intel facilities in the Portland metropolitan area. To those familiar with the clinic, the workplace functioned without apparent conflict. Milner maintained a residence in Oregon City and was known to neighbors as reserved and private. His veterinary practice generated sufficient income to support his lifestyle. By most outward measures, his life appeared stable and predictable. In the early 2000s, Stephen Milner and Tanya Fondrick began a personal relationship that extended beyond their professional association. The relationship remained undisclosed to others for a period of time. Kenneth Fondrick eventually became aware of the situation. Following this discovery, Tanya ended her personal involvement with Milner and informed him that she intended to focus on her marriage. Milner did not accept this outcome. Court documents later detailed a pattern of behavior that began after the relationship concluded. Kenneth and Tanya Fondrich started noticing irregularities in their daily lives. They discovered GPS tracking devices attached to their vehicles on multiple occasions. Home security cameras captured footage of an individual approaching their property during nighttime hours. When Kenneth documented these incidents and reported them to law enforcement, the behavior continued over an extended period. On March 11, 2022, Kenneth Fandrick filed for and was granted a stalking protective order against Stephen Milner through the Washington County court system. The order legally prohibited Milner from contacting Kenneth, Tanya, or approaching their residence or places of employment. Court records show that Milner was formally served with the order and acknowledged its terms. Investigators later determined that Milner did not comply with the protective order. Digital forensics and vehicle registration data revealed that Milner purchased 2 additional vehicles during this period. Financial records showed these purchases were made under circumstances that differed from standard transactions. Surveillance footage from various locations, including a Home Depot parking lot in Oregon City, documented Milner switching between 3 different vehicles throughout single days. Law enforcement later referred to these vehicles as burner cars, comparing them to disposable phones used to avoid tracking. GPS data extracted from Milner's primary vehicle placed him at the Intel Ronler Acres campus on more than a dozen occasions between late 2022 and early January 2023. Security footage showed vehicles matching the description of Milner's secondary purchases entering the parking structure during hours when Kenneth Fandrick typically arrived for or departed from work. On December 13, 2022, when security cameras at the Intel campus recorded an individual in a hard hat and safety glasses using spray paint to cover camera lenses in the parking structure. The individual's vehicle was later identified as matching one of the cars connected to Milner. The cameras were cleaned and restored to function. No arrest was made at that time, but the incident was documented. On January 27, 2023, Kenneth Fandrick parked his vehicle in the Intel Ronler Acres parking structure and entered the facility to begin his work shift. That morning, security cameras in the section where Kenneth typically parked were again spray painted. Footage captured prior to the camera obstruction showed a person wearing similar protective gear and driving a blue sedan. Later that afternoon, a maroon minivan entered the parking structure and parked adjacent to Kenneth's vehicle. When Kenneth returned to his car at the conclusion of his shift, security footage from cameras outside the affected area showed movement near the 2 vehicles. The maroon minivan departed the structure approximately 30 minutes later. Kenneth Fondrich didn't leave the parking structure. His wife Tanya reported him missing when he failed to return home that evening and did not respond to calls or messages. Authorities responded to the Intel campus and located Kenneth inside his vehicle. Medical examination determined that Kenneth had sustained fatal injuries to his neck and spine. The positioning of his body and personal belongings initially suggested a natural cause of death, but the autopsy revealed trauma inconsistent with that conclusion. The Hillsborough Police Department initiated a homicide investigation. Detectives reviewed security footage from multiple Intel campus cameras. The maroon minivan observed on January 27th was traced through traffic cameras and toll records. Investigators learned that the vehicle had been sold on Craigslist weeks earlier to a buyer using the name Jerry Lee. The phone number provided by the buyer was linked to Stephen Milner. Oregon Department of Transportation records showed the minivan had been abandoned on Interstate 5 in North Portland days after Kenneth's death. A tow company recovered the vehicle and eventually sold it to a scrap metal facility. Detectives attempted to preserve the vehicle for forensic analysis, but arrived after it had been destroyed. The blue sedan observed in earlier footage was also located abandoned in North Portland. GPS data from Milner's registered vehicle corroborated his presence at locations consistent with purchasing, using, and disposing of both secondary vehicles. Stephen Milner was arrested on January 31st, 2023, and charged with second-degree murder, stalking, and 7 counts of violating a stalking protective order. The case proceeded to trial in Washington County. Prosecutors presented the timeline of stalking behavior, the protective order violations, the vehicle purchases under an alias, the security camera tampering, and the forensic evidence regarding Kenneth's injuries. Video footage, GPS data, and witness testimony were introduced. The defense argued that Milner acted in self-defense and claimed that Kenneth had attacked him when the two encountered each other in the parking structure. And Milner testified in his own defense and stated he could not recall specific details, but believed he was protecting himself from harm. The jury deliberated and returned a guilty verdict on all counts in January 2025. The conviction confirmed that Kenneth Fandrick's death was not accidental, and that Milner had repeatedly violated legal boundaries prior to the killing. Judge Eric Bucker sentenced Milner in February 2025 to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 25 years. Prosecutors noted that the security camera footage, despite being obscured during critical moments, provided the investigative foundation that connected Milner's methodical preparation to the outcome in the parking structure. Number 3. Carla Hughes. On December 1st, 2006, investigators conducting routine interviews at Chastain Middle School in Jackson, Mississippi received information from an attorney representing Patrick Nash, a deputy with the Weld County Sheriff's Office. Nash wished to provide a statement regarding a firearm he had loaned to his cousin days before a recent homicide in Ridgeland. Carla Ann Hughes was born on June 12, 1981, and was raised in Greenville, Mississippi, by her uncle Carl Hughes and his wife Linda, who adopted her at 6 weeks old. She excelled academically throughout her childhood and participated in horseback riding and beauty pageants. Hughes attended Belhaven College, where she earned a master's degree in education, and later completed graduate coursework at Delta State University. At the time of her employment at Chastain Middle School, she was pursuing doctoral studies. Its colleagues described her as dedicated to her students and involved in mentoring programs through her church. She taught language arts and maintained what appeared to be a professional demeanor in her classroom and during faculty meetings. Her educational background and community involvement presented the image of an accomplished young educator focused on career advancement. In August 2006, Carla Hughes met Keon Pittman, who also taught at Chastain Middle School. Pittman worked as a physical education instructor and coached the basketball team. Both were employed in the same building and interacted regularly in common areas. A personal relationship developed between them. Pittman was engaged to Avis Banks, a 27-year-old woman who worked at a daycare facility. Banks was 5 months pregnant. Pittman and Banks lived together in Ridgeland and were planning their wedding. The relationship between Hughes and Pittman remained undisclosed to most people in their professional circle. On the evening of November 29, 2006, Keon Pittman left basketball practice at Chastain Middle School and drove to the home he shared with Avis Banks on Old Square Court in Ridgeland. Neighbors reported hearing what sounded like a loud argument or disturbance earlier that evening but did not observe specific individuals. Pittman arrived at the residence and discovered the back door had been forced open. The door frame showed damage consistent with being kicked. Pittman entered the home and located Avis Banks in the garage. She had sustained multiple injuries and was unresponsive. Pittman immediately contacted emergency services, where Ridgeland police officer Jason Barnes arrived and found Pittman in a state of distress near Banks's body. Paramedics confirmed that Banks had died prior to their arrival. Medical personnel also determined that the unborn child had not survived. The scene showed signs suggesting a possible burglary. Drawers in the bedroom were open with clothing on the floor. However, no valuables appeared to have been taken. The back door damage indicated forced entry. Investigators documented the scene and began interviewing individuals connected to the victim. Pittman provided a statement and confirmed he had been at basketball practice during the time frame when the incident likely occurred. His cell phone records and witness statements from students and staff at the school supported his account of his location. The Ridgeland police expanded their inquiry to include people familiar with Banks and Pittman. Detectives interviewed staff members at Chastain Middle School. During these conversations, officers learned that Pittman had personal relationships with multiple women. Carla Hughes, was identified as someone who had frequent contact with Pittman. When questioned on December 1st, 2006, Hughes initially stated she was friends with Pittman but did not disclose the full extent of their involvement. She denied having access to firearms. Investigators noted inconsistencies in her responses. On the same day, Patrick Nash's attorney contacted authorities. Nash informed investigators that on November 26, 2006, 3 days before Banks's death, Hughes had asked to borrow a firearm and a knife for personal protection. Nash loaned her a loaded Rossi Point .38 caliber revolver containing 5 rounds. Hughes returned the weapon to Nash on December 1st, approximately 1 hour after her interview with police. Nash observed that the gun was empty when she returned it. This information prompted investigators to request forensic analysis. The Madison County Crime Laboratory conducted ballistics testing. 5 bullets were recovered from the scene. 4 were removed from Avis Banks's body and 1 was found lodged in the garage door. Testing confirmed that all 5 bullets had been fired from the .38 caliber Rossi revolver Nash had provided to investigators. A search warrant was executed at Hughes's residence in Jackson. Investigators located a pair of women's athletic shoes in her closet. The tread pattern on the shoes matched a bloody footprint found on the exterior back door of the Banks residence. Forensic examination detected traces of Avis Banks's blood on the shoes. Cell phone records obtained from Hughes's service provider placed her mobile device within range of a tower near the Banks residence during the estimated time of death. No evidence indicated Hughes had been in that area for any other reason that evening. Carla Hughes was arrested on December 6, 2006, and initially charged with accessory after the fact to murder. On December 8th, the charges were elevated to 2 counts of capital murder under Mississippi Code Section 97-3-19(2)(e), which addresses the killing of a pregnant woman and her unborn child. Hughes remained in custody after bond requests were denied. The trial commenced in October 2009 in Madison County Circuit Court. Prosecutors argued that Hughes killed Avis Banks to remove a romantic obstacle and to pursue a future with Keon Pittman. The state presented the ballistics evidence linking Nash's gun to the crime, the forensic match between Hughes's shoes and the bloody footprint, and the cell phone data. Keon Pittman testified about his relationships with both women and described the discovery of Banks's body. The prosecution emphasized that Hughes had motive, means, and opportunity. The defense challenged the sufficiency of the evidence and argued that no physical evidence placed Hughes inside the Banks' residence. When defense attorneys pointed out that Pittman himself had been considered a suspect early in the investigation and suggested that he had greater reason to want Banks dead than Hughes did. They noted that Pittman had been involved with multiple women and questioned his credibility as a witness. The defense also argued that the cell phone tower data could not pinpoint Hughes's exact location and that alternative explanations existed for each piece of evidence. After approximately 8 hours of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on both counts of capital murder on October 13, 2009. Mississippi law permits capital murder charges when the victim is pregnant, treating the death of the unborn child as a separate count. The conviction moved to a sentencing phase where prosecutors sought the death penalty, and the jury declined to impose capital punishment. On October 14, 2009, the court sentenced Carla Hughes to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Hughes filed post-conviction motions and appeals. In 2010, a Madison County judge denied her request for a new trial. The Mississippi Supreme Court affirmed the conviction on June 21, 2012, finding no merit in the 6 issues raised on appeal. Carla Hughes is incarcerated at the Central Mississippi Correctional Facility for Women in Pearl, Mississippi. She continues to maintain her innocence. The firearm Patrick Nash provided to investigators, along with the forensic testimony linking it to the scene, became the definitive piece of evidence that the jury relied upon when determining the verdict. Number 4, Betty Broderick. On November 5, 1989, San Diego police received a 911 call at approximately 5:40 a.m. reporting gunshots at a residence in the Marston Hills neighborhood. When officers arrived at 1041 Cypress Avenue, they found 2 deceased individuals in the master bedroom. Initial timestamp analysis revealed a discrepancy between the estimated time of death and when the call was placed, prompting investigators to determine who had been present at the location during the intervening period. Elizabeth Ann Bisceglia was born on November 7, 1947, in Bronxville, New York. She was the 3rd of 6 children in a Catholic family. Her father, Frank Bisceglia, owned a successful plastering business. Betty, as she was known, attended Catholic schools and planned to enroll at a local Catholic women's college after high school. At age 17, she met Daniel T. Broderick III during a Notre Dame football game in Pittsburgh. Dan was attending law school and came from a working-class Catholic family in Pennsylvania. The relationship developed quickly. Betty postponed her college plans and supported Dan financially while he completed his education. They married in 1969. Betty worked multiple jobs to pay for Dan's medical school tuition at Cornell University. After Dan graduated, the couple relocated to San Diego in 1973. Dan passed the California bar exam and began practicing medical malpractice law. His income increased substantially over the following years. Betty remained home to raise their 4 children, daughters Kim and Lee, and sons Daniel IV and Rhett. The family lived in an upscale home in La Jolla and belonged to country clubs. To people familiar with the Brodericks, they appeared to represent a successful professional family. In the fall of 1982, Dan Broderick hired 21-year-old Linda Kolkina as a receptionist at his law firm. Linda had previously worked as an airline stewardess and did not have legal training or typing skills. Betty became suspicious of the hiring decision and the amount of time Dan spent at the office. She confronted Dan about the possibility of an extramarital relationship. Dan initially denied any involvement. Betty reported finding evidence that contradicted his statements. Tension in the household increased. Arguments became more frequent. Dan eventually acknowledged that a relationship with Linda had developed. Betty responded by damaging property in the home, including burning Dan's clothing and throwing a stereo at him. Dan Broderick filed for divorce. And the legal proceedings extended over several years and involved disputes regarding asset division, spousal support, and child custody. Court records documented multiple restraining orders and contempt citations filed against Betty for violating court orders. Dan was awarded custody of the children. Betty was ordered to vacate the family home. She received monthly support payments of $16,000, but argued this amount was insufficient given her previous lifestyle and the length of the marriage. Dan implemented a system of financial penalties for Betty's behavior, deducting money from her support payments when she violated court rules. Betty drove her car through the front door of Dan's new residence on one occasion, which resulted in a 3-day psychiatric hold. The divorce was finalized on January 30th, 1989. Dan married Linda Kolkina on April 22, 1989, just months after the divorce became official. 1 month before the wedding, Betty purchased a Smith & Wesson .38 caliber revolver. Friends later reported that Linda had expressed concern about Betty's behavior and had suggested Dan wear a bulletproof vest at their wedding. Dan declined but employed plainclothes security at the ceremony. Betty did not attend. On the morning of November 5th, 1989, Betty drove to Dan and Linda's home on Cypress Avenue. She had obtained a key to the residence from her daughter Kim. Betty entered the home while Dan and Linda were asleep. She went to the master bedroom and fired 5 shots from the revolver. Linda Kolkina Broderick died immediately. Dan Broderick sustained injuries that were not instantly fatal. Medical evidence later indicated he survived for several minutes. Betty removed the telephone and answering machine from the bedroom before leaving. This prevented Dan from calling for assistance. Betty contacted her daughter Lee and Lee's boyfriend after leaving the residence. She then drove to a police station and turned herself in. She admitted to investigators that she had fired the weapon but stated she hadn't planned the shootings. Betty claimed she went to the house intending to confront Dan and Linda about ongoing legal and financial disputes and had planned to take her own life afterward. She stated she was startled when Linda screamed and told Dan to call police, which caused her to fire the gun. Prosecutors charged Betty with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The first trial began in October 1990. During the proceedings, Betty testified in her own defense and described years of emotional and financial abuse. She characterized Dan as controlling and manipulative. She stated that he used his legal knowledge to ensure she received minimal financial support after the divorce. The defense argued that Betty had been pushed beyond her limits and acted without premeditation. Prosecutors countered that Betty's purchase of the gun 1 month before Dan's remarriage, combined with her practice sessions at a shooting range and the removal of the phone from the bedroom, demonstrated planning and intent. The jury deliberated but could not reach a unanimous verdict. A mistrial was declared in November 1990. A second trial commenced in December 1991. The evidence presented was largely similar to the first trial. Our prosecutors again emphasized the timeline showing Betty's gun purchase, her familiarity with firearms, and her actions after the shootings. The defense reiterated that Betty had been subjected to prolonged emotional distress and hadn't formed the specific intent required for first-degree murder. After reviewing all testimony and evidence, the jury returned guilty verdicts on 2 counts of second-degree murder on December 11, 1991. The second-degree classification indicated the jury found the killings were intentional but not premeditated over an extended period. Judge Thomas Whelan sentenced Betty Broderick to 2 consecutive terms of 15 years to life, plus 2 additional years for illegal use of a firearm, totaling 32 years to life. Betty became eligible for parole in January 2010, when the Board of Parole Hearings denied her request, citing lack of remorse and failure to accept responsibility. A second parole hearing in January 2017 resulted in another denial. Betty Broderick remains incarcerated at the California Institution for Women in Chino. Her next parole eligibility date is January 2032, at which time she will be 84 years old. The discrepancy between the time the shots were fired and when Betty turned herself in became a focal point in establishing that she had time to consider her actions before contacting authorities. Number 5, Sabrina Lyman and Jonathan Hearn. 2 weeks after Robert Lyman's death on August 17, 2014, Kern County investigators received an unsolicited phone call from Jason Bernatine, a mutual friend of the Lyman family. Bernatine reported receiving an unusual voicemail from a man named Jonathan Hearn expressing condolences about Robert's death in a manner that seemed overly apologetic and detailed. The caller had not been previously identified as connected to the case. Sabrina Limon was born in 1980 in Prescott, Arizona, where she spent her childhood. At 18 years old, she met Robert Limon, who also lived in the area with his mother. The couple married on August 19, 2000, and began building a life together. Robert secured employment as a mechanic with BNSF Railroad, which led to their relocation to Hellendale, California. They purchased a home on Strawberry Lane in the Silver Lakes community. The neighborhood was known for its social atmosphere and active residents. Sabrina took a part-time position at a local Costco while caring for the couple's 2 children. Robert's work schedule involved regular shifts at the railroad facility in Tehachapi. Friends described the couple as outgoing and sociable. They hosted gatherings at their home and were part of a close group that referred to themselves as the Wolf Pack. In 2008, Sabrina and Robert explored an open marriage arrangement with other couples. To people familiar with their social circle, the Lymans appeared engaged in their community and committed to their family structure. Jonathan Hearn was a firefighter based in Redlands. He was married and active in his Christian faith. Sabrina met Hearn while working at Costco. They began conversing during her shifts and eventually exchanged contact information. Both shared religious beliefs and discussed scripture regularly. Their communications increased in frequency. A romantic relationship developed despite both being married. Sabrina maintained her public image as a dedicated wife and mother, while continuing the private involvement with Hearn. Robert eventually discovered intimate text messages between Sabrina and Hearn on Sabrina's phone. Robert confronted Sabrina and demanded she terminate contact with Hearn. Sabrina agreed to end the relationship, but continued communicating with Hearn without Robert's knowledge. In April 2014, according to later testimony, Sabrina and Jonathan formulated a plan to poison Robert. Evidence presented at trial indicated that Hearn obtained arsenic and mixed it with banana pudding, which Sabrina placed in Robert's lunch. On the day the plan was set to occur, Sabrina called Robert at work and told him not to eat the pudding because it had spoiled. Robert did not consume the food. The plan was abandoned. On August 17, 2014, Robert Lyman reported to his workplace at the BNSF railway facility in Tehachapi for his regular shift. Surveillance cameras in the area recorded a motorcyclist arriving at the location during the evening hours. The individual wore a red bandana covering the lower face and carried a backpack. Robert was found with gunshot wounds near his vehicle. Emergency responders arrived but were unable to revive him. Medical examination determined he had been shot twice, with wounds to the head and chest. The scene suggested a targeted attack rather than a random act of violence. No robbery had occurred and Robert's personal belongings remained with him. Each detectives initially investigated the death as a homicide with unclear motive. Interviews with Sabrina revealed that Robert worked predictable hours and had no known enemies. The motorcyclist captured on surveillance could not be immediately identified. The investigation appeared to lack clear direction until Jason Bernatine contacted authorities. Bernatine's information identified Jonathan Hearn as someone connected to Sabrina. Detectives confirmed Hearn's employment as a firefighter and established that Sabrina and Hearn had been involved in an extramarital relationship. This discovery shifted the focus of the investigation. Authorities obtained authorization for wiretaps on both Sabrina's and Hearn's phones. Over the following weeks, investigators monitored their communications. The recorded conversations frequently referenced biblical passages and spiritual concepts. Law enforcement analysis of these discussions suggested the pair were using coded language to avoid direct acknowledgement of their involvement in Robert's death. Hearn also switched to internet-based phone services and provided Sabrina with a prepaid phone, behaviors consistent with attempting to evade surveillance. On November 18, 2014, authorities executed a search warrant at Hearn's residence. Investigators recovered a motorcycle, a helmet, a red bandana, and a backpack that matched descriptions from the surveillance footage near the railroad facility. A grocery bag containing receipts was also located. Jonathan Hearn was arrested and charged with murder. Sabrina Limon was not arrested at this time, as investigators continued building their case against her. Jonathan Hearn remained in custody for over 2 years as prosecutors prepared for trial. His trial was scheduled for January 2017. Days before proceedings were set to begin, Hearn changed his plea. He entered into an agreement with prosecutors in which he pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, attempted murder, poisoning, and accessory charges. In exchange, he received a sentence of 25 years and 4 months and agreed to testify against Sabrina Limon. His testimony became the foundation of the case against her. Sabrina Limon was arrested in January 2017, just days before Hearn's scheduled trial, and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation to commit murder, and being an accessory after the fact. Her trial began in September 2017. City prosecutors argued that Sabrina orchestrated Robert's death to avoid the financial and custody complications of divorce and to pursue a future with Hearn. They presented the wiretapped phone conversations, Hearn's testimony describing the poisoning attempt and the shooting plan, and evidence that Sabrina provided information about Robert's work schedule and location. Hearn testified that Sabrina was involved in every stage of planning and that she wanted to collect $300,000 in life insurance benefits. The defense contended that Hearn acted independently and that Sabrina had no knowledge of his intentions. Her attorney Richard Terry argued that Hearn had motive to fabricate his testimony given the plea deal reducing his sentence, where Sabrina testified in her own defense and denied any involvement in planning Robert's murder. She stated that Hearn had manipulated her and that she trusted him when he asked questions about Robert's routine. On October 6, 2017, the jury convicted Sabrina Limon on 4 of 6 counts, including first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation. She was acquitted of the alleged poisoning attempt. Sentencing occurred in February 2018. The court imposed a sentence of 25 years to life in prison. Sabrina filed an appeal challenging her conviction. The California Court of Appeal upheld the verdict in 2022. She subsequently petitioned the California Supreme Court for review. In January 2023, the Supreme Court declined to hear her case. Sabrina Limon is incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. She will become eligible for parole in February 2033. Jason Bernatine's decision to report the voicemail from Jonathan Hearn introduced the name that investigators hadn't previously encountered and established the investigative pathway that ultimately led to both arrests. Number 6, Shauna Nelson. On January 23, 2007, evidence technicians processing clothing collected from a person of interest in a Greeley homicide discovered gunshot residue on fabric that had been worn the previous evening. The individual who owned the clothing worked as a dispatcher for law enforcement and would have been familiar with forensic testing procedures. Shauna Louise Nelson was born and raised in Colorado. She married Ken Nelson, a deputy with the Weld County Sheriff's Office. The couple had 2 children together and lived in the Greeley area. Shauna worked as a 911 dispatcher for the Greeley Police Department, a position that placed her in regular contact with officers, detectives, and emergency response personnel. Her role involved receiving emergency calls, coordinating officer dispatch, and maintaining communication logs. Colleagues described her as competent in her duties. Ken Nelson was regarded as a reliable member of the sheriff's department. To those familiar with the Nelson household, the family appeared stable. Shauna's work schedule required shifts that sometimes extended into evening hours. Her employment gave her knowledge of police procedures, response protocols, and investigative methods. While working as a dispatcher, Shauna Nelson met Ignacio Garaus, a police officer with the Greeley Police Department. Ignacio, known as Ig, was married to Heather Garaus. Ignacio and Heather had a young daughter together. Despite both being married, Shauna and Ignacio began a personal relationship that extended over several years. During this period, Shauna became pregnant. She gave birth to a son. Ken Nelson was aware of the situation. He initially considered ending his marriage, but ultimately agreed to remain with Shauna and help raise the child. The relationship between Shauna and Ignacio continued intermittently. In December 2006, Ignacio informed Shauna that he was ending their involvement. He stated he would not provide financial support for their son and intended to focus on his marriage to Heather. Friends and coworkers later reported that Shauna expressed anger and frustration following this decision. One testimony presented at trial indicated that Shauna discussed Heather with a friend named Michelle Moore. Moore later stated that Shauna mentioned wanting Heather removed from the situation. On January 23, 2007, Heather Garaus left her workplace at the Colorado State Employees Credit Union in Greeley shortly after 5 p.m. The credit union was located at the intersection of 25th Street and 11th Avenue. The parking lot was visible from nearby businesses in the street. As Heather walked toward her vehicle, a person dressed in black clothing and wearing a black mask approached her. Multiple witnesses were present in the area and observed the encounter. The individual in black spoke to Heather and ordered her to get down on her knees. Witnesses reported hearing Heather respond by saying, "Okay." She knelt down, and the masked individual fired 2 shots. Heather sustained gunshot wounds to her head and collapsed. The person in black fled the scene. Witnesses described the individual running toward a pickup truck and driving away. Emergency services were contacted immediately. Greeley police officers and paramedics arrived within minutes. Heather Garaus was pronounced dead at the scene. The Greeley Police Department initiated a homicide investigation. Detectives interviewed witnesses who had seen the shooting. Descriptions of the assailant's clothing, build, and vehicle were documented. The pickup truck was described as similar in appearance to vehicles commonly owned in the area. Investigators focused on individuals connected to Heather and Ignacio Garaus. Ignacio provided a statement about his professional relationship with Heather and acknowledged the existence of his previous involvement with Shauna Nelson. Detectives interviewed Shauna Nelson. She stated she had been on her way to a liquor store at the time of the shooting and had not been near the credit union. Her husband, Ken Nelson, confirmed that Shauna had left their home that evening but could not verify her exact location during the relevant time frame. Detectives obtained Shauna Nelson's clothing from the evening of January 23rd. Forensic analysis conducted by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation detected gunshot residue on her jacket, face, and right hand. The residue indicated recent proximity to a discharged firearm. Investigators also learned that Ken Nelson owned a handgun registered in his name. Ballistics testing determined the weapon matched the type used in the shooting. Ken Nelson was questioned about the firearm. He acknowledged that Shauna had access to it and knew how to load and fire the weapon. Michelle Moore, who had been a friend of Shauna Nelson and also worked in law enforcement, was contacted by investigators. Moore initially denied knowledge of the crime. On November 14, 2007, Moore provided a revised statement to police. She told detectives that Shauna had discussed killing Heather Garaus and had asked Moore to provide an alibi by babysitting Shauna's children on the day of the shooting. Moore stated that Shauna told her she wouldn't need to know details and could honestly say she was unaware of Shauna's actions. Moore was subsequently charged with being an accessory to the crime, where she pleaded guilty and agreed to testify. Shauna Nelson was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Due to pretrial publicity and the possibility that potential jurors in Weld County might know witnesses or have connections to law enforcement, the trial was moved to Larimer County. Proceedings took place at the Larimer County Justice Center in Fort Collins, beginning in late February 2008. Prosecutors presented witness testimony describing the shooting. The forensic evidence showing gunshot residue on Nelson's person, the ballistics match to Ken Nelson's firearm, and testimony from Michelle Moore regarding conversations about planning the crime. The state argued that Shauna Nelson acted with premeditation and that her knowledge of police procedures informed her attempt to create an alibi. The defense challenged the credibility of Michelle Moore and suggested she had a personal motive to implicate Shauna. Defense attorneys argued that the gunshot residue could have been transferred through contact with Ken Nelson or through Shauna's work environment. They contended that witness descriptions of the shooter were not specific enough to confirm identity and that Shauna had no opportunity to commit the crime, given her stated timeline. The defense also questioned whether the evidence was sufficient to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for approximately 6 hours over 2 days. On March 3, 2008, they returned a guilty verdict on the charge of first-degree murder. Judge Roger Klein immediately proceeded to sentencing. Under Colorado law, their first-degree murder carried a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Judge Klein stated that Nelson had carried out the crime with great planning and deliberation, and that she deserved to serve every day of the sentence imposed. Shauna Nelson was sentenced to life without parole. Ken Nelson was charged with tampering with evidence based on allegations that he handled the firearm after the shooting. He testified at Shauna's trial under immunity and stated he had stopped Shauna's vehicle shortly after the crime and spoke with her before later turning in the weapon. Charges against Ken were eventually dropped following Shauna's conviction. Ignacio Garaus resigned from the Greeley Police Department weeks after Heather's death. Shauna Nelson remains incarcerated in Colorado. The forensic detection of gunshot residue on clothing worn by someone trained in evidence protocols became the scientific link that corroborated witness accounts and established presence at the scene. Number 7. Robert Hall. On the evening of March 11, 2011, dispatch records for Meridian, Idaho showed a 911 call originating from a Walgreens pharmacy parking lot. The caller reported a shooting involving 2 adult males. Vehicle registration data later revealed that one of the involved parties had no documented reason to be at that commercial location during that time frame, as his residence and workplace were both several miles away in different directions. Robert Dean Hall was born in Idaho and attended school in the Treasure Valley area. But he worked for Ada County in a maintenance capacity and was described by supervisors as reliable in his duties. Robert married Candy Hall, and the couple had 2 children together. They resided in Meridian and participated in community activities typical of families in suburban Idaho. Robert maintained a predictable work schedule and routine. Friends and neighbors knew the Halls as an active household. Robert was involved in his children's schools and attended their events. To those familiar with the family, Robert appeared committed to his role as a husband and father. His daily patterns included going to work, returning home, and spending evenings with his family. Candy Hall secured employment as a paralegal. In late 2010, she was hired by Emmett Corrigan, an attorney who had recently opened a small criminal defense practice in the area. Emmett was 30 years old and had passed the bar after attending law school in Utah. He was married to Ashley Corrigan, and they had 5 children together. Ashley had given birth to their 5th child just weeks before. Emmett worked long hours building his practice and needed assistance with administrative tasks and case management. Candy had experience in criminal law and was familiar with court procedures. The working relationship between Candy and Emmett developed into a personal involvement. Both remained married to their respective spouses while the relationship continued. Coworkers at the law office later reported noticing the amount of time Candy and Emmett spent together, both during and outside of business hours. Robert Hall became aware that Candy was involved with Emmett Corrigan. Friends later stated that Robert confronted Candy about the situation. Tension in the Hall household increased. On March 11, 2011, Robert and Candy had a verbal disagreement at their home. Candy left the residence and stated she needed to pick up a prescription from the Walgreens pharmacy, located on East Overland Road in Meridian. Candy drove her vehicle to the pharmacy and met Emmett Corrigan in the parking lot. She got into Emmett's truck. According to her later testimony, they drove to a gas station and subsequently to a developing subdivision where they had sexual contact inside the vehicle. While Candy was away from home, her daughter noticed Candy's car parked at the Walgreens and informed Robert of the observation. Robert called Candy on her cell phone to ask about her location. At this point, according to court testimony, Emmett Corrigan took the phone from Candy and spoke directly to Robert. Emmett told Robert to wait and said they would be coming right out. This phone conversation was later presented as evidence during trial. Robert Hall left his residence and drove to the Walgreens location. Emmett and Candy returned to the Walgreens parking lot at approximately 10 p.m. Robert was waiting in the area. A confrontation occurred between Robert and Emmett near Emmett's truck. Candy testified that she witnessed the 2 men arguing. She stated she saw Emmett shove Robert. Candy then turned away. She reported hearing gunshots, but didn't see the moment the weapon was fired. Emmett Corrigan sustained 2 gunshot wounds. 1 bullet struck him in the head and another struck him in the chest. He collapsed and died at the scene. Robert Hall also sustained a gunshot wound to his head. The injury was superficial and described as a grazing wound. Medical personnel arriving at the scene treated Robert and transported him to a hospital. Meridian police officers secured the area and began processing the scene. Investigators found a firearm near Robert's location. Witnesses in the vicinity reported hearing the argument and the shots, but had not observed the entire sequence of events. Detectives interviewed Candy Hall, who provided an account of the evening and described the confrontation. She stated that Emmett appeared agitated during the phone call with Robert, and that he seemed prepared for a physical altercation when they returned to the parking lot. Candy confirmed that she and Emmett had been involved in an extramarital relationship. Robert Hall was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The investigation included review of cell phone records, witness statements, and forensic analysis of the firearm. Surveillance cameras at the Walgreens captured portions of the events in the parking lot, though video quality and angles limited visibility of specific actions. Robert Hall's trial took place in Ada County in October 2012. The defense argued that Robert acted in self-defense. Defense attorneys contended that Emmett Corrigan initiated physical aggression and that Robert feared for his safety. They presented testimony suggesting Emmett was a larger individual who had made threatening statements during the phone call. The defense also noted that Robert's own gunshot wound indicated he had been in genuine fear and had attempted to harm himself after the shooting, demonstrating he had not intended the outcome. Prosecutors disputed the self-defense claim. They argued that Robert traveled to the Walgreens with a firearm, waited for Emmett and Candy to return, and confronted Emmett with the intent to cause harm. The state emphasized that Robert had time to consider his actions during the drive to the pharmacy and while waiting in the parking lot. They contended that the phone call with Emmett provided additional time for Robert to reconsider, but that he chose to remain armed and present. Prosecutors also challenged the claim that Robert attempted suicide, suggesting the head wound was staged to support a self-defense narrative. The jury reviewed all evidence, including Candy's testimony, the surveillance footage, and forensic reports. After deliberation, the jury convicted Robert Hall of second-degree murder on October 25, 2012. The second-degree classification indicated the jury found Robert acted with intent, but that the killing was not premeditated over an extended period. Judge Deborah Bale sentenced Robert Hall to 30 years in prison with eligibility for parole after serving 17 and a half years. Robert filed an appeal challenging the conviction. He argued that the jury was not properly instructed on self-defense standards under Idaho law, and that evidence regarding Emmett's prior social media posts showing a tendency toward confrontation should have been admitted. The Idaho Court of Appeals reviewed the case and upheld the conviction in 2016. They're finding that the jury had received appropriate instructions and that the excluded evidence was not substantial enough to alter the outcome. Robert Hall is incarcerated at the Idaho State Correctional Institution in Kuna, Ada County. He will become eligible for parole in 2028. The observation of Candy Hall's vehicle in a parking lot location that did not align with her stated errand prompted the sequence of phone calls and travel that brought all three individuals to the Walgreens that evening. Number 8. Rajwinder Singh. On October 22, 2018, Australian Border Force records indicated a passport belonging to a Cairns area resident had been used to exit the country through Brisbane International Airport bound for India. When the departure occurred less than 24 hours after Queensland police had opened a missing person case involving a woman last seen in the same region where the traveler lived and worked. Rajwinder Singh was born in Punjab, India, and immigrated to Australia, where he settled in far north Queensland. He found employment in the healthcare sector, working as a registered nurse at a hospital in Innisfail, a small community located between Cairns and Townsville along the Bruce Highway. Singh was described by colleagues as competent in his professional duties and capable in patient care. He was married with 3 children and maintained a residence in the Innisfail area. Those who interacted with Singh professionally found him to be reliable in his work. He had knowledge of medical procedures, patient assessment, and clinical protocols typical of hospital nursing staff. To most who knew him, his life appeared stable and unremarkable. Toya, accordingly, was 24 years old and worked at an organic food store in Cairns. She had grown up in the region and was known for her gentle nature and deep connection to animals. Toya volunteered at an animal shelter and owned a dog named Indy. She regularly took Indy to beaches along the coast for exercise and enjoyed spending time at Wangeti Beach, a stretch of coastline located north of Cairns, known for its relative seclusion and scenic views. Toya's routine often included visiting the beach after work or on days off. Family and friends were familiar with her habit of walking her dog along the shore. She lived with her partner and maintained close relationships with her parents, who resided nearby. On the afternoon of October 21st, 2018, Toya drove to Wangeti Beach with Indy. She parked her vehicle near the beach access point around 2 p.m. Security camera footage and witness accounts later placed her at the location during daylight hours. Toya walked onto the beach with Indy. She did not return home that evening. Her father, Troy Cordingley, became concerned when Toya failed to respond to phone calls and messages. He drove to Wangeti Beach to look for her. Troy Cordingley found Toya's vehicle still parked near the beach early the next morning. He walked onto the sand and located Toya's body partially buried in sand dunes, approximately 80 meters from her car. Indy was found alive nearby, tied tightly to a tree. Troy immediately contacted emergency services. The Queensland police officers and forensic teams were dispatched to the location. The scene was secured and a homicide investigation was initiated. Forensic analysis determined that Toya had sustained multiple stab wounds and that her throat had been slashed. The medical examiner confirmed the attack had been violent and personal in nature. Detectives began reviewing security footage, witness statements, and digital records. Investigators discovered that on the morning of October 22, 2018, just hours after Toya's body was discovered, Rajwinder Singh had booked a one-way flight to New Delhi, India. He told a travel agent that his grandfather was gravely ill and required immediate travel. Singh departed Australia that same day, leaving behind his wife and 3 young children without saying goodbye. His wife did not hear from him and had no knowledge of his plans to leave the country. Queensland police identified Singh as a person of interest when investigators determined that the movements of his blue Alfa Romeo matched the GPS tracking data from Toya's mobile phone as it left Wangeti Beach on October 21st. Cell tower records and vehicle tracking placed Singh's car at the beach during the time frame when Toya was killed. Forensic technicians collected DNA evidence from the crime scene. Analysis produced results that matched a profile associated with Rajwinder Singh. While the investigation progressed, Singh remained in India. His wife and 3 children, who depended on him financially, lost their home during his absence. Queensland police continued to gather evidence and build the case. In November 2022, new authorities announced a $1 million reward for information leading to Singh's location and arrest. The reward represented the largest in Queensland history. Within weeks of the announcement, Singh was located in New Delhi. On November 25, 2022, Police Scotland arrested Rajwinder Singh at a Sikh Gurdwara in New Delhi, based on information provided to Queensland authorities. Singh was taken into custody and held pending extradition proceedings. He did not contest the extradition and stated publicly that he wanted to return to Australia to reveal all details to the court. He maintained his innocence but waived his right to challenge the extradition order. Rajwinder Singh was transported back to Australia and arrived in Queensland in March 2023, more than 4 years after the crime. He was formally charged with the murder of Toya Cordingley. Legal proceedings took place in Cairns Supreme Court. Singh pleaded not guilty, and the case proceeded to trial in early 2025. After days of deliberation, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, and a mistrial was declared. A second trial commenced in November 2025. Prosecutors presented DNA evidence linking Singh to the crime scene, digital tracking data showing his vehicle's movements, matched Toya's phone location, witness testimony, and evidence of his immediate flight from Australia. The prosecution argued that Singh's decision to flee the country demonstrated consciousness of guilt. Justice Lincoln Crowley presided over the 4-week retrial, wherein the defense contended that the evidence was circumstantial and that Singh could not have overpowered both Toya and her dog, acting alone. On December 8, 2025, after approximately 7 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict. Toya's father, Troy, was heard saying to Singh in the courtroom, "Rotten hell, you bastard." The following day, December 9th, 2025, Justice Crowley sentenced Rajwinder Singh to life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 25 years. The judge noted that, while the motive remained unclear, the most likely explanation was that Toya had encountered Singh engaged in inappropriate behavior at the secluded beach, and that he killed her to prevent her from reporting what she had witnessed. The judge also considered that Singh had taken Toya's phone, possibly because she had recorded him or was preparing to contact authorities. Rajwinder Singh is incarcerated in Queensland and will not be eligible to apply for release until he has served 25 years. Queensland police later confirmed that the $1 million reward had been paid to several individuals who provided information leading to Singh's arrest. Toya Cordingley's family established initiatives in her memory focused on violence prevention and community safety. The administrative record of a passport departure within hours of a victim's disappearance became one of the investigative indicators that connected Rajwinder Singh to the events at Wangeti Beach. Number 9. Melanie Maguire. On May 5, 2004, toll system records maintained by the Delaware River and Bay Authority indicated that a vehicle registered to a Woodbridge, its New Jersey address, had crossed the Chesapeake Bay Bridge multiple times during late-night hours on April 29th and 30th. The registered owner of the vehicle had no documented business, family, or employment connections in the Virginia coastal region where the bridge was located. Melanie Lynn Slate was born in Ridgewood, New Jersey in 1972. She attended nursing school and became a registered nurse specializing in fertility treatment. Melanie was regarded as professional in her duties and knowledgeable about reproductive medicine procedures. She married William Maguire in 1999. William, known as Bill, was 39 years old and worked as a computer programmer for the New Jersey Institute of Technology. The couple had 2 sons together when they purchased a condominium in the Woodbridge area and established what appeared to neighbors as a typical suburban household. Melanie continued her nursing career after the births of her children. Bill maintained steady employment and participated in family activities. In 2002, Melanie secured a position at the Reproductive Medicine Associates Clinic in Morristown, New Jersey. The facility provided fertility services including consultations, treatments, and surgical procedures. Melanie worked alongside physicians, embryologists, and other medical staff. Among her colleagues was Dr. Bradley Miller, a physician specializing in reproductive endocrinology. Dr. Miller was married and had children. Despite both being married, Melanie and Dr. Miller developed a personal relationship that extended beyond professional boundaries, when the involvement continued for approximately 2 years. Coworkers later testified that they observed the two spending time together outside of work hours and noticed behavior suggesting a close connection. The marriage between Melanie and Bill McGuire became strained. Friends later reported that the couple experienced financial difficulties and disagreements about household matters. Bill was described by acquaintances as becoming increasingly frustrated with the state of the marriage. On April 28, 2004, Bill McGuire did not report to work at his scheduled time. Colleagues contacted his supervisor to report his absence. Bill also failed to answer phone calls from family members. His vehicle remained parked at the condominium complex in Woodbridge. Melanie told relatives that Bill had left the home and she did not know his whereabouts. On May 5, 2004, a fisherman near Virginia Beach discovered a large suitcase floating in the water of the Chesapeake Bay. The suitcase was recovered by authorities. Inside were human remains that had been dismembered. 2 additional matching suitcases containing additional remains were found on May 7th in nearby waters. The Virginia Beach Police Department initiated an investigation. Medical examiners determined the remains were those of an adult male who had been shot and subsequently dismembered. The body had been divided into sections using a cutting implement consistent with a surgical or medical saw. Forensic analysis allowed investigators to identify the remains as belonging to William McGuire through dental records and other identifying features. Such as New Jersey State Police were notified and took over the investigation as the victim's last known residence was in their jurisdiction. Detectives began examining Bill's known associates, financial records, and personal relationships. Melanie McGuire was questioned about her husband's disappearance. She stated that Bill had left the home after an argument and she had not seen him since. She expressed surprise when informed that remains had been found. Investigators obtained records of purchases made using credit and debit cards linked to the McGuire household. On April 26, 2004, 2 days before Bill's disappearance, a transaction at a sporting goods store in Paramus showed the purchase of a set of 3 Kenneth Cole brand suitcases. The suitcases matched the manufacturer, color, and size of those recovered from the Chesapeake Bay. Store surveillance footage captured a woman matching Melanie's description making the purchase. Detectives also reviewed toll records for the EZ Pass system used on highways and bridges throughout the region. Melanie's vehicle had passed through tolls on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge during the early morning hours of April 29th and April 30th. The bridge was located approximately 250 miles from Woodbridge and crossed the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, near where the suitcases were found. Forensic computer analysis was conducted on devices in the McGuire home. Technicians recovered search history from a computer used by Melanie that included queries related to methods of disposing of remains, the depth and current patterns of the Chesapeake Bay, and undetectable poisons. Few additional searches involved terms related to obtaining weapons and how to commit murder. Cell phone records placed Melanie's phone in the Virginia area during the times the toll system recorded her vehicle on the bridge. Investigators learned that the weapon used to shoot Bill McGuire was a handgun registered in his own name. Melanie had access to the firearm and knew its location in the home. Forensic testing on the weapon matched ballistic evidence from the remains. Detectives also examined Melanie's workplace. The Reproductive Medicine Associates Clinic maintained logs for medical equipment. Records indicated that a medical-grade surgical saw had been checked out during the relevant time period. Staff confirmed that Melanie had training in handling such equipment as part of her nursing responsibilities. Melanie McGuire was arrested on June 23, 2005 and charged with murder, desecration of human remains, and perjury. Her trial took place in New Brunswick beginning in March 2007. Prosecutors presented the evidence of the suitcase purchase, the Easy Pass records, the computer searches, the ballistics match, and testimony regarding the affair with Dr. Miller. The state argued that Melanie killed Bill in their home, dismembered his body using medical equipment she accessed through her employment, placed the remains in the suitcases, and transported them to Virginia, where she disposed of them from the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Prosecutors contended the motive involved both the desire to be with Dr. Miller and financial considerations related to life insurance. The defense challenged the timeline and argued that evidence did not definitively prove Melanie was the person driving her vehicle during the toll crossings or using the computer to conduct searches. Defense attorneys suggested that Bill McGuire could have been involved in activities or relationships that made him a target for others. They questioned the chain of custody for some forensic evidence and argued that the prosecution's case relied too heavily on circumstantial connections. The defense also noted that no forensic evidence, such as blood or tissue, was found in the McGuire residence that definitively linked the apartment to the crime. The jury deliberated for several days. On April 23, 2007, they returned guilty verdicts on all charges, including first-degree murder and desecration of human remains. Judge Frederick DeVisa sentenced Melanie McGuire to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder conviction. Additional consecutive sentences were imposed for the other charges. Melanie filed appeals, challenging the conviction based on arguments that certain evidence should not have been admitted and that jury instructions were inadequate. The appeals were denied by the New Jersey Superior Court Appellate Division, and the New Jersey Supreme Court declined to review the case. Melanie McGuire remains incarcerated at the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women in Clinton, New Jersey. She has maintained her innocence in public statements and media interviews conducted from prison. The discrepancy between automated toll system records and any documented reason for a New Jersey resident to travel Virginia's coastal bridges during overnight hours became a data point that placed the registered vehicle owner at a location consistent with where evidence of the crime was recovered. Number 10, David Temple. On January 11, 1999, crime scene investigators responding to a reported shooting in Katy, Texas noted that a jewelry box in the master bedroom had been opened and items scattered, but other valuables in plain view throughout the residence remained untouched. The pattern of disturbance did not match theft behavior documented in residential burglaries recorded in Harris County during that period. David Mark Temple was born in Texas and grew up with an interest in athletics, and he attended college on a football scholarship and played as a linebacker. After completing his degree, David pursued a career in education and coaching. He was hired as a teacher and assistant football coach at Alief Hastings High School in the Houston area. Colleagues described him as focused on building competitive teams and maintaining discipline among players. David was regarded as dedicated to his coaching responsibilities and familiar with game strategy. He married Belinda Lucas in 1992. Belinda was also employed in education and worked as a teacher. The couple settled in Katy, a suburban community west of Houston. In 1997, Belinda gave birth to their son, Evan. The Temple household appeared stable to neighbors and friends who knew the family. David's coaching schedule required evening practices and weekend games, when Belinda balanced her teaching position with caring for their young child. By 1998, Belinda was pregnant with the couple's second child. She was due to give birth in February 1999. Friends later stated that Belinda was preparing for the arrival and had begun setting up the nursery. During this period, David Temple developed a personal relationship with Heather Scott, a teacher at Hastings High School where he worked. Heather was in her 20s and taught in a classroom near David's office. The two were observed spending time together by other staff members. The relationship continued while Belinda was pregnant. Testimony presented in later proceedings indicated that David and Heather met outside of school hours and that their involvement was ongoing during the months leading up to January 1999. On the afternoon of January 11th, 1999, David Temple called 911 from his residence on Round Valley Drive in Katy. He reported that he had returned home from running errands and found his wife unresponsive. Emergency personnel arrived at the scene. Belinda Temple was located in the master bedroom closet. She had sustained a fatal gunshot wound to the head. She was 8 months pregnant. Medical personnel confirmed she was deceased. The fetus had also died. Harris County Sheriff's Office deputies secured the residence and initiated a homicide investigation. Detectives observed that the back patio door had been forced open and that certain items in the bedroom appeared disturbed. A jewelry box had been opened and some contents removed. However, investigators noted that a purse containing cash and credit cards was visible on a counter and had not been taken. Other items of value, including electronics, were present in the home and undisturbed. David Temple provided a statement to detectives. He explained that he had left the home earlier in the day to take his son Evan to a park and to purchase items at a hardware store. He stated that when he returned home with Evan, he found the back door damaged and discovered Belinda in the closet. He said he called 911 immediately after. Detectives reviewed David's timeline. They obtained receipts from the hardware store that confirmed a purchase at the time David stated. Employees at the store did not specifically recall seeing David. Neighbors were interviewed regarding any suspicious activity or vehicles observed near the Temple residence. No witnesses reported seeing anyone entering or leaving the property during the relevant hours, when the weapon used in the shooting was identified as a 12-gauge shotgun. Forensic analysis determined the shot had been fired at close range. No shotgun was found in the Temple home. Investigators learned that David owned firearms, but stated that a specific shotgun had been stolen from his vehicle several months prior to the crime. Records confirmed he had reported the theft to police. The investigation remained active but did not immediately result in charges. Detectives continued gathering evidence and interviewing individuals connected to the Temples. David Temple resigned from his position at Hastings High School and later accepted a coaching position at another district. In 2004, his relationship with Heather Scott became public when the two were married. And the case remained under review by the Harris County District Attorney's Office. In 2007, investigators presented findings to prosecutors. On November 15, 2007, nearly 9 years after Belinda's death, David Temple was arrested and charged with murder. The trial took place in 2007. Prosecutors argued that David killed Belinda to pursue his relationship with Heather Scott and to avoid the responsibilities of a second child. The state presented evidence of the affair, questioned the validity of the staged burglary based on the selective nature of items disturbed, and highlighted inconsistencies in David's account of his movements. Forensic experts testified about the shotgun wound and the lack of evidence supporting an intruder. The defense contended that the shotgun used in the crime was the same weapon that had been stolen from David's truck months earlier, and that an unknown individual had used it to commit the murder. Defense attorneys argued that investigators focused on David to the exclusion of other possibilities, and that the delayed arrest indicated a lack of solid evidence. The jury convicted David Temple of murder on November 8, 2007. Judge Shaver sentenced him to life in prison. David Temple filed appeals, challenging the conviction. His attorneys argued that prosecutors had withheld evidence related to an alternative suspect, and that this constituted a violation of discovery rules. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed the case and overturned the conviction in 2016, ordering a new trial. A second trial took place in 2019 in Harris County, and prosecutors again presented evidence of the affair, the crime scene staging, and David's opportunity to commit the crime. The defense again challenged the sufficiency of evidence and argued reasonable doubt. The jury convicted David Temple a second time on August 5, 2019. Judge Kelly Johnson sentenced him to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 30 years. David Temple is incarcerated in Texas. He will become eligible to apply for parole in 2037. The observation that certain items had been disturbed while other valuables remained accessible led investigators to question whether the scene reflected genuine theft or an attempt to create that appearance.